Yo, what's checking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Crewcast here on the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is Jason Sukamel. Yes, that means we've changed up. I guess I'm replacing Cole Patterson, which is not words I ever thought that I would say out loud, but it's true. I'm replacing Cole on the Crewcast. This video brought to you by the guys over at Prime Shrimp. 30% off orders of 6+ when you go to Prime Shrimp and use the promo code Orangebloods. And I do want to mention that today, later on, they're giving away a Yeti cooler on Orangebloods. So Prime Shrimp doing it big. Glad to have you guys with us here in the chat as you guys pour into listen to us talk a little bit about recruiting. Jason, it's been a good last month or so for the Longhorns after all of the consternation and worrying about commits and how they're doing in state. The Longhorns have a recruiting class that if they end up getting the guys that we think they're projecting to get, it's going to end up being a really good recruiting class, better than I probably thought it would be a month ago.
Yeah, I think you and I both need to eat a little crow, Catch, because I was
not yet.
There's still work to be done, and I wasn't poo-pooing the class necessarily, but everybody said, "Oh, it's going to be top 3 and top 5." All these fans, I was like, I don't know, man. I'm thinking maybe top 8 to 12. With the way things are shaping up. But if things continue to trend the way I think they are with a couple of the big fish especially, yeah, you can certainly see this thing getting in the top 5 range, and who knows, maybe possibly challenging for a top 3 type finish. But they've had, I was looking a little bit ago, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 commitments in the last 1 week span. Possibly we've got another one coming tomorrow. Aeryn Hampton's going to decide. We'll talk about that, of course. Possibly getting another one next week. So this thing has gone from having only 2 or 3 commitments to really, we're more than halfway done with this class at this point. We probably will be by the end of next week.
Well, the key to this thing, really, if they're going to be anywhere near a top 5 class, and certainly shaping up like they could if they end up getting a Ryan Wingo and some of the other out-of-state blue chips that we're talking about, it's a really strange recruiting class because they're not doing great in state. They're doing okay. They're doing pretty good, but they're not doing great in state. And yet from a total recruiting class standpoint, there's a world out there where you can see where they could finish somewhere around the top 5. And it will make, I think, watching this class go through its entirety, right? The next 4 or 5 years of following how this group does, I think will be quite telling, because when the Longhorns have gone heavier out of state in the last decade or so than they have in state, or it's 50-50-ish, it hasn't quite worked out for the Longhorns. So one of the things that will be critical for this class is that the out-of-state guys hit the ground running and kind of embed themselves, I think, into the program earlier than we've seen them do in previous years, because if they don't, then you can see where this class could have some problems, just because I think the backbone of this class is going to be with the out-of-state prospects.
Well, and we've seen where it hasn't been entirely successful before. Yes, Texas has recruited out-of-state heavily before. We saw Tom Herman do it. They recruited well, but those guys didn't materialize once they got them to campus. That was before the portal, Catch. So now you got guys coming in from out of state, and if they're not happy early on, you may get them for a semester, and they're going to be looking to move. So it's an interesting dynamic, an interesting way of doing it. A lot of other programs recruit nationally and seem to have success with it. Fans and probably you and I to some degree have always wondered, why doesn't Texas try to recruit a little bit more nationally? Personally, yeah, I guess in a perfect world, you'd love to see them just clean up on the top 15 or so guys in the state, and then maybe go out and cherry pick some guys out of state. But this class, it's shaping up to be, I don't know, maybe I have to go through and add them up, but close to 50-50 in state versus out of state. You look at kind of the top 10, top 15 guys in the state of Texas, and the Longhorns aren't leading for many of them. So this class to me is odd. It's going to be a really good class, I feel like, but they are going out of state somewhat by necessity, which is kind of feels like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth there. They're not kicking butt in state, so they're having to go out of state, but hey, whatever they're doing, I think it's going to work out for them. But you're right. It's a different ballgame when you're recruiting guys who are, 1,000, 1,200 miles from home versus guys that are 180 miles from home. And in the age of the portal, we don't know what that's going to look like 2-3 years from now with a class that's heavily from out-of-state prospects. So it'll be, like you said, it'll be interesting to follow for the next 4 or 5 years.
Jason, let's talk about the defensive backfield for a little bit. We released a deep dig piece with Alex on vacation this week. We kept the column going. One of the guys that we focused on today, Kobe Black, borderline 5-star defensive back. This secondary class is, to me, starting to get really interesting because it feels like there are 8 or 10 guys at the Longhorns. Mm-hmm. We've seen Wardell Mack emerge as a guy that's a candidate to end up as a DB guy in this class. It's a position that I can't quite wrap my head around yet with regards to how it's going to finish. A couple of weeks ago, you and I thought that Miles Davis was a guy that you might pencil in with ink and not like an eraser, whether or not he would end up in this class. I wonder now, if you had to predict how many guys they take in the secondary and who ends up in this class, given the number of guys they're recruiting, how do you think it shakes out? And, oh, by the way, Aeryn Hampton is a guy that looks like is going to be penciled in as a secondary guy, and he makes his announcement tomorrow.
Yeah, he's primarily being recruited as a defensive back for Texas. They're talking about doing some things on offense too, but if we count him as a DB, that's 3 commitments on the defensive side or the defensive backfield. Santana Wilson, Jordan Johnson-Rebel, Aeryn Hampton, if he picks Texas. Suddenly numbers start getting tight. You mentioned Miles Davis. A month and a half ago, people thought he was a lock to A&M. He visits Texas officially, and I felt like he was a pretty strong lock to Texas, and I feel like I had pretty good reason to feel that way after talking to Miles, but now A&M might be surging there again. Kobe Black is an obvious take. Selman Bridges is a guy the staff really loves. I think if they get Hampton tomorrow, that puts them at 3. I think they'll probably take 2 more. I think the guys I just mentioned, but it's those numbers are always so fluid and flexible, and some that can depend. Hey, in August, what happens with some of the guys that are on the roster now, and if some of those guys wind up, being disgruntled or not happy or buried on the depth chart, and they want to leave those. Everybody always asks me that question: how many of this are we going to take? How many of that are we going to take? I say it's more unpredictable now than it really has ever been because there's so much movement within the current roster that can happen. It's hard to predict, but it's a good problem to have. I mean, Texas has a lot of top-end defensive back talent that I think they have a strong chance of landing. Where that number winds up, I'm thinking probably 5. I guess you could see him go as high as 6 defensive backs for counting Aeryn Hampton as a defensive back. So, those DB coaches, Terry Joseph and Blake Gideon, have done a good job so far.
I think the number's got to end up being at least 6 when it's all said and done, unless they're going to start turning guys away. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, Kobe Black's obvious. Selman Bridges, I don't know.
Do you think they're holding a spot for Selman Bridges?
The way that, I didn't even mention Corey and Gibson. He's another one, so it could be.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, Joshua Lair is another guy that we kind of had penciled in after his visit. I do think they're holding a spot for Selman Bridges. I felt that way for a while. I haven't heard any reason to feel differently. Sark is the lead recruiter on Selman Bridges. You don't do that unless he is a top priority for you. The guy's a really unique talent in terms of his length and on the outside there. I do think they're holding a spot. I think he's a top priority for him. But if they get 2 or 3 more of these guys that we just talked about, then somebody's might get shut out. And it could be Selman Bridges because he's a guy who initially said, hey, I'm not going to decide till December. Well, now he's saying it could be this summer. It still could be December. The longer he waits, man, the tighter that squeeze gets, and he could wind up being on the outside looking in. But I do think as it stands now, they're still fully planning on him being part of the class, assuming he wants to make that choice of Texas.
Well, if we assume that Aeryn Hampton commits to Texas tomorrow, and we think that's what he's going to do, but Aeryn Hampton is one of these guys all the way through signing day. I think we'll hedge our bets a little bit. Like anything can happen with Aeryn Hampton.
It'll be his 3rd public commitment, 2 to the same school. He's publicly proclaimed, Alabama as his favorite at one time, and he's probably not going to pick Alabama, we don't think. So, yeah, Aeryn Hampton's a guy. We'll be watching him until December for sure.
So that's 3. Then Kobe Black's got a spot reserved.
Mm-hmm.
We think Corian Gibson's got a spot reserved.
I do, yeah.
And I think Selman Bridges is a guy that like you mentioned it, that's a guy that Sark is specifically hands-on recruiting. That's 6 right there. And we haven't gotten to Wardell Mack or a couple of other guys. We mentioned Miles Davis. I think it is almost certainly going to be 6 instead of 5, only because of the numbers involved. And they can even say, look, we're taking Aeryn Hampton as an athlete and we'll figure it out when we get him on campus. You can do your accounting in a number of different ways. The bottom line is the secondary of this class, following on the heels of last year's recruiting class, shouldn't have any issues with defensive backs moving forward. When you think about what they might be able to do in this class coupled with what they did a year ago, those would be back-to-back national, I think, top 5 DB type classes. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes up, because I don't think in our minds, you and I have been planning on them going this DB heavy, given that, where they're sitting in terms of commitments. You start thinking about the rest of their needs and what they would like to do. I think they could go beyond 25 commitments when it's all said and done. I know that there have been indications that they would take a full class. Nothing about Sark ever screams that he's going to put his foot on the brake when it comes to high school
anymore, though. It almost just makes me think a minimum of 25. Full class could be 30. I mean, honestly.
And it would mean that they would be expecting a lot of attrition next year. It's not a massive senior class. They would already need to hit double digits in attrition just to be able to fit a full class in from a numbers standpoint. And if they go big and beyond that, I think you'd suddenly be looking at a lot of attrition that you'd be counting on. And Herman's guys are gone now. Like, we're at a point now where future attrition is probably going to start coming out of these. It has to start coming out of these. Go ahead.
I said you might see it in the defensive backfield too. There's
no doubt about that. So in terms of just moving the discussion away from the DBs and looking ahead, we've got Hampton tomorrow. We've got Melvin Hills next week.
Maalik is on Saturday. I'm still kicking the tires on that one. I still think that one will be Auburn. The defensive lineman, his brother plays at Auburn. I know he liked Texas a lot. I talked to him after his official visit, but I'm still following up on that today, trying to gather a little more intel. But he's Saturday. But in terms of guys, I think going to Texas, Aeryn Hampton tomorrow night. Melvin Hills will be Wednesday the 12th in the evening as well. Yeah.
And it's funny because last week I was told, I guess the 9th would be Sunday. Do I have that right? I think that's right, because July 4th was on a Tuesday. I was told last week, nothing firm about July 9th. I was just told kind of July 9th-ish to be on the lookout for something that may be happening with Colin Simmons, that if he gives an early commitment, I think there was some thought that it could happen around sometime next week, which would be perfect because you won't be around. That'd be
great. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and say this, and I don't want people to misconstrue that I'm like, oh, I'm so confident that Colin Simmons is going to Texas. I did start on a Colin Simmons commitment story, and I even got quotes from a couple, not Colin, he's not talking about, from a couple other people. Just God forbid if he commits when I'm like standing at the Grand Canyon with my kids or something with no Wi-Fi access. So I will be emailing you, Catch, a Colin Simmons commitment story. I'm not saying that I'm saying, hey, I fully expect him to commit next week, but hey, in this game, you got to be prepared for anything and everything as best we can. So your email will be getting your inbox will be getting a Colin Simmons commitment quote before I leave town on Saturday.
If he doesn't commit in July, I mean, Colin Simmons can do whatever he wants to do, and he kind of beats to the beat of his own drum anyway. So, I mean, I don't want to say if it doesn't happen in July, it won't happen until later in the year, knowing he could commit on August 1st after I've said it would need to happen in July, or the expectations would be. But to me, it feels a little bit like Micah Hudson, in that the further we get away from the anticipation that it was going to happen, like, oh my God, it's going to happen, and it might happen next week. And my instincts tell me that it just goes on. that ultimately kind of what I would say about Colin Simmons is what I would say about Micah Hudson, which is when we get to August 1st and it still hasn't happened, then you start thinking about, well, he did say he wanted to take additional visits. He'd always said he wanted to visit College Station. We know that there's an LSU.
He's penciled in, Catch, to be in College Station at the end of July. That's been his plan all along.
Correct.
Go there for their little pool party thing. So, does he commit before then? If not, does he wind up there? Does he take that LSU visit? So you're right. You don't want to, panic necessarily, but the longer it gets away, there was so much buzz coming out of that official visit of his. And, it's kind of natural. It seems, it happens all the time, but that's why I kind of always tempered my enthusiasm a little bit. I still think Texas is in a really good spot, but the further you get away from that visit and the high of the visit and the shine of that visit, I think the chances go down a little bit with each passing week that he's going to make a decision for Texas in the summer. So, if you're a Texas fan, if you're a Texas coach, you'd much rather have him committing on July 9th, right, than having to fight tooth and nail all the way till October, November, even December for him.
And I have my eyes glued for next week, like based on the intel that I picked up about, I think it was a week ago today, the 9th was the date that was pointed at as just make sure you're around. Sorry. Yeah. It's hard not to let,
you'll be around.
You're going to replace Anwar as every time I go on vacation, they get a 5-star commitment. It starts potentially with Colin Simmons. It will be interesting to see where that recruitment goes from here. If he actually takes the trip to College Station, I think we would then maybe have some answers with regards to Colin Simmons, that while I think Texas is the heavy leader now, that recruitment it would go back to what we thought when he
I don't think him going to A&M is an indication that the Aggies are a big threat. I think it's an indication that this thing's going to go on probably a lot longer than we maybe expected a couple weeks ago.
Well, I've already predicted. I think the Aggies are going to end up being the team.
Yeah, you did
November and December that end up. I think LSU is going to get the hell on out of Dodge. They'll still recruit the kid, and obviously they bring in Colin Simmons for an official visit. But you get this sense from LSU that they know, all things being equal, he wants to stay closer to home. That family is a big deal for Colin Simmons, and the further away he goes, the more complicated it gets in terms of being able to be closer to his family. We know he's got an incredible relationship with his younger brother that's really important to him. A&M, in terms of a competition for Texas with Colin Simmons, would be a school that's close to home. They can offer that. And then it comes down to what a guy's looking for in a program. And up until now, Colin Simmons has really screamed out loud that he really digs the in-state. If you're going to, why not stay home in the state of Texas and try to win something big for the home state school? It's always been Texas in that role. It'll be interesting to see if A&M's able to crack the glass on that at all. If they're not, I think Texas is eventually just going to cakewalk their way to the finish line with Colin Simmons, which isn't something that we thought was actually going to happen for most of his recruitment. We thought it would be, closed fists and tight everything with regards to what it might feel like once we get towards November and December. But if A&M doesn't emerge as a factor in his recruitment, Texas may end up winning the Colin Simmons recruitment going away. And I think if that's going to happen, you would probably see him commit early. I think if he has any doubts, his original plan was to wait anyway. So to just be curious to see how all of that unfolds. You wouldn't expect that he would commit to Texas and then visit A&M on an unofficial visit 2.5 weeks later. Like, that doesn't make a ton of sense.
Colin's such a wild card, though. Oregon's still in play there. Miami. I don't think he's going to wind up at those schools, but he's visited. He really likes those places. It's no coincidence that with all these Texas predictions coming in right in the last few weeks, including even I put a future casting for Texas. It's no coincidence that he keeps going on social media and he'll post like an Oregon picture, an SMU picture, and a Miami picture, and then maybe a Texas picture. I mean, he wants to keep people guessing. He enjoys, I think, the the gamesmanship of it to some degree. So, even if it's not A&M that emerges as a threat, somebody else will be a threat, be it a Miami, Oregon, maybe it's still LSU. I don't know. And frankly, even if he commits, I've said this before, and you've said it before, Ketchup, even if he commits on July, 9th, whatever the date is, Texas is still going to have to fight tooth and nail to hang on to that commitment. Those other programs aren't going away. Now, he probably doesn't visit A&M 2 weeks later, but maybe in the fall he does, or maybe he still takes that LSU visit. So, I think there's still lots of work to be done on Colin Simmons regardless. Switching gears real quickly, I see a question from Anthony Garza in the chat about an O-lineman committing tomorrow. That's Nair Daniels out of Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. Georgia's the overwhelming favorite there. He really liked Texas for a long time, visited UT. I actually thought he might wind up at Texas. Sadir Mitchell is his teammate, but he visited Georgia, went on his official visit there, ended up canceling his Texas official visit, which is a pretty good indication, I think, of where things stand. So everybody's expecting him to wind up at Georgia.
We did have a super chat from Jay Lee, so we'll go to that one right away. Speaking of DBs, we want our quarterback hurries to turn into sacks. Won't the sacks come once our pass coverage improves? We were bad last year, 90th in the country. It's funny how those two things go hand in hand, Jason. I mean, yeah. When you've got a good pass rush, your DBs are better. And when your DBs are better, the sacks improve. The good news for Texas, especially if they get a guy like Colin Simmons, you can start to see both of those positions loading up athletically and talent-wise, which means that the production should improve. There's no reason that Texas should be finishing 90th in the country in any major defensive stat moving forward. This should be a group that's really good. The conversation eventually is going to turn into, I think, very good to elite. What's that last step? It does say a lot that there are still some areas of this Texas defense that haven't reached the very good kind of category yet. I think sacks, creating turnovers, those were the two things. From a pretty good defense a year ago, those were a couple of the things holding that defense back from being really good, maybe even great. I don't think they're going to be that bad this year. I think they will get better, but I don't know that the numbers are going to be dramatically different, even if I think the play improves.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting text. So I'm a little distracted, but yeah, you're right. Those things, that's kind of the chicken or the egg. I mean, is the defensive line pressure better because the secondary is covering better, or is the secondary coverage better because the defensive line's forcing the ball out quicker? But bottom line is you want both those operations working at an elite level. So, I think Texas is getting there with the secondary recruiting you mentioned last year and what we think is happening this year, but they still need a guy like Colin Simmons. They've recruited pretty well along the defensive line. Bo Davis has taken big numbers. The Westlake kids he's taken back-to-back years are fantastic, but Texas has to start finding those truly elite defensive linemen if they want to, moving forward, compete with the Georgias and the Alabamas and the SEC and those types of schools. Frankly, A&M's been doing a fantastic job with their defensive line recruiting. That's one area I still feel like Texas needs to improve, is that defensive line recruiting. Getting Colin Simmons, he's more of an edge player, obviously, but getting Colin Simmons would be a huge step in the right direction for Texas.
I'm going to put this one on a T, this next question from the chat, simply because I swear you're the first guy that I heard mention this specific thing. How real is the smoke with Alabama and Micah Hudson?
You know what? I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, maybe on the Crewcast or a few weeks ago. I need to circle back on that. Like, that was I think I said, I heard that, I can't remember where I said it, but I heard Alabama had moved ahead of Texas in the second spot, still behind Texas Tech.
I think this is going back to before he canceled the visit. This is how that conversation was going.
It was right about that time, because I remember talking to an Alabama source, and they said, hey, they're hearing Alabama. I think it was a Texas Tech source that said actually Alabama might be the second team behind Texas Tech. So I think it's real, but man, I'm telling you, I don't know what the hold up is with him committing to Texas Tech. I asked somebody this week, and they're like, nobody has any idea. That train with Texas Tech is so far down the line, though. If he ends up not committing to Tech, I'm just going to say, like, a lot of people have wasted a lot of time in production and things of those types of things. So, it's recruiting. Why hasn't he announced yet? I don't know. There've been a couple kind of behind the scenes stated deadlines. Okay, it's going to happen on this day. Didn't happen. Okay, it's going to happen this day. Didn't happen. We're still all waiting. I honestly don't know what the holdup is, but that thing's so far down the line. Like I said, with Texas Tech, I saw that with Blake. Longest 7-on-7 tournament ever. He skipped his Texas visit for 7-on-7. But I still think that's pretty strongly trending to Tech. A source that I asked this week about is like, Texas Tech is not sweating it at all. They're fine with him going to visit A&M when he's at that 7-on-7 deal. They're fine with everything. Texas Tech is still extremely confident, and until I hear otherwise, I think that's still where the safe bet is.
You know what it is? Everybody always makes the Mac Brown joke about, when you're engaged, you can't still see other women, and that's kind of what a commitment is. I can't help but have wondered that Micah, forget about the engagement. Every guy that's married and therefore hence was engaged before that, before there's ever an engagement, there's the thought of, is this really the only girl I want to date? Forget about the engagement. That's a long time down the road. Is this the one? Do I want to stop dating? It's kind of what we were just talking about with Colin Simmons, right? If we get to the end of July and he visits College Station, it's probably an indication that he's just not quite ready. And he's got that right. Like, there shouldn't be any rush to commit. But Micah Hudson could be the same way. If Alabama's a school that he wants to kick the tires on, he wants to check out, he wants to take an official visit to, it becomes a little bit more problematic when you've committed to a school. So the longer this goes on, the same thing that I said with Colin Simmons, I somewhat think with Micah Hudson, that the more and more time he has to think about it, it's possible that he's just not quite ready to give up dating. Both of those guys like the social media game. They like posting pictures. They like kind of getting fans juiced up a little bit. So both of those guys, their recruitments are completely different in a lot of respects. If I had to wager money, I think both might be committed by the end of the month. But I could also see a world where both guys continue to let it play out. And there are Texas fans in the chat right now who are like, who cares about Micah Hudson? Well, the coaches are still trying. So as long as the coaches are giving the old college try to get that kid, you should probably cut in some slack and leave open the possibility that he could become a member of this recruiting class. I've certainly seen guys in the past that Texas fans have given up on and stopped wanting to talk about, and then they end up getting back involved in. And it's like,
then they're everybody's favorite again. Yeah.
Let me walk back comments that I made 7 months ago.
Yeah.
Hey, Terry Bussey, I wanted to ask you about him.
Mm-hmm.
His recruitment, I think, has got a ways to go before it's over. It seems like Texas definitely has given him something to think about. Even if I think if you and I were to put money on it, we'd bet on A&M. But the possibility of Texas still exists. For you, what would be the thing that could happen that we should look for that would be the best sign that Terry Bussey is legitimately interested in Texas, and that is like a real one moving forward?
There's been rumor the last couple of weeks that he might be close to committing. That's kind of been behind the curtain talk. I don't necessarily believe it. When I talked to Terry following his Texas visit, he had no. I mean, who knows? He could be lying to me, of course. But his plan was to take it deep in the process and drop like a top 5, I think, at the very end of summer, and then take visits all the way deep into the fall. I think if you're Texas, you don't want him committing this summer. If he commits this summer, it's probably going to be A&M. I don't think it's going to be Texas. That being said, yes, I do think UT helped its position on the official visit. What do I think needs to happen? I just think Texas still has ground to make up there. He hasn't taken an A&M official visit, so I almost think Texas would need to get him back on campus again for maybe a visit in the game, or for a game, excuse me. And Terry says he doesn't care about playing offense or defense. Texas has been talking to him about both now. Chris Jackson's become more involved. I think if Texas has a chance, we talked about all the defensive backs are taken. I mean, they have to convince him that he can be an offensive player for them. And Chris Jackson and Sark are going to have to help win that recruitment. I just don't see it from a numbers perspective. I think Texas is in the conversation there. I think they'll remain in the conversation, but I just don't think I see a clear path for Texas taking the lead in that one and ended up securing his commitment.
It's funny because I thought the same thing you did. I think you've got to get him back on campus before the season starts. And then if they got him in town for a game, so we're talking 2 more visits, then that would have my attention. I do wonder about the numbers, though. That's one of the reasons why I brought that up. If you sold him on being the wide receiver centerpiece of this class, maybe that sounds more attractive than we were just, if you just tuned in and Brazar has wanted us to go over the Colin Simmons recruitment. We did that a little bit earlier. We talked about the DBs extensively earlier. We talk about the numbers. I think it would be hard to convince him to come in with all of the numbers that Texas has in the DBs. But if you could convince him that wide receiver was where it's at, and that assuming that Hudson goes somewhere else, and obviously Ryan Wingo is there as well, but if you could convince him that he'd be the guy at wide receiver, that he could play early, and that Sarkisian puts guys into the league at that position, I want – a lot of it just comes down to where he sees himself playing the most. And he seems to be a little wishy-washy on that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he's wishy-washy. I just genuinely don't think he has a preference. Like, I've asked him that question several times.
Wasn't that wishy-washy?
Well, I don't
know.
Whatever just gets him on the field. It's not like he flips back and forth from one to the next. It's always been like, I don't have a preference. Just, hey, whatever gets me on the field, whatever helps the team. He's an awesome kid to talk to. He says all the right things. And I don't consider him wishy-washy that he's flipping. He just kind of says, hey, man, whatever they need from me, that's what I'm willing to do.
Indifferent.
Yeah, maybe.
Let me just keep going until I pick the word.
We'll stick with indifferent. Yeah.
And there's an indifference to like one versus the other. And I think if Texas is going to get that kid, it may be because he becomes no longer indifferent to one or the other. If he ever decides, you know what, that's what I want to do, and it's wide receiver, I think Texas has maybe a better than fighting chance. I wonder, because like I said, we could, in theory, we could be at the end of July and Texas has 5 or 6 DB spots filled, and you're wondering, okay, well, they've got one save for Selman Bridges. Are they just going to take 6 and the first guy to come along? I don't know. I'm kind of curious, just kind of see where that one goes. All right, Jason, let's wrap this bad boy up. Give me a parting shot. Last recruiting thing on your brain. We'll end it there.
Today's Thursday, so last recruiting thing. I'm expecting 2 additions to this class in the next 6 days. I feel pretty confident in both of them. So this commitment train keeps rolling, and then we'll kind of be on Colin Simmons' watch and Kobe Black and some of these other guys. Corey Gibson, I've heard maybe mid to late July for him for a date. So there's still a lot of dominoes to keep watching for the rest of this month. But I feel really strongly about 2 guys adding to the class in the next 6 days.
Which would put them at 14?
Mm-hmm.
I've lost track. They've picked up so many commitments, and they keep coming at a dizzying pace.
Yeah, they're at 14 or 12 right now, excuse me.
It might be that – I guess my final comment I would just be if they take 10 or 11 more beyond the 2 that you referenced, it might be that 8 of those 10 end up being as highly ranked as any in the class. So, the foundation is built. I think the haymakers are coming soon, which may include some 5 stars, some high 4 stars, certainly a number of super blue chips, both in-state and out of state. So lots of stuff to get excited about moving forward. Guys, do us a solid. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Ring that bell. You can get notifications. So anytime we go live or have videos, you are instantly notified, I guess is how that works. Until then, guys, we plan on being back tomorrow. Onward and I will have a special buy or sell tomorrow. Not really special. It'll just be buy or sell on a Friday. And then if there's any reason to have breaking news, instant analysis off of the Aeryn Hampton decision tomorrow, which we think there will be, we'll come in live tomorrow as well to break that down. So lots of stuff coming up on the Texas football or the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. Until tomorrow, you guys have a great rest of the day. War Room tonight. We're all working on our stuff. Get your butt on over to Orangebloods and check that bad boy out. It should be nuggets galore. Until then, you guys take care. We'll see you soon.